Look at the scar. It is exactly as foretold.
What does this mean for us?
The prophecy is beginning.
The sun rose slowly over the village of Ancora, painting the thatched roofs with streaks of gold and amber. Smoke from morning fires curled lazily into the sky, carrying the scent of burning wood and spices. Children ran barefoot along the dusty paths, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic chants of the elders who gathered near the central shrine. This village, small and tightly knit, was a place where every event, every birth, and every whisper carried weight. In Korra, prophecies were not mere stories, they were a part of life. When the winds shifted in unusual ways, when the river rose higher than usual, or when the birds sang in strange patterns, the villagers believed it was a sign. And now all eyes were on one family, Amina and Kofi, expecting their first child. Amina, her round belly swaying with each careful step, walked alongside her husband, Kofi, whose strong hands trembled as he carried a basket of fresh fruits. They moved with caution, aware that every glance from a neighbor carried judgment. The prophecy had spread through the village like wildfire. A child would be born soon, marked in a way that would change everything. Some whispered that the child would bring hope, others feared a calamity. Amina's dark eyes flickered with worry. "Do you think it will be a boy or a girl?" she asked softly, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Kofi hesitated. I do not know," he said, though his mind wrestled with the prophecy that had been repeated to him countless times. "But whatever it is ours. And it will be loved." Despite his words, anxiety weighed heavily on both of them. The villagers' expectations were impossible to ignore. Mothers nodded with warm smiles, but behind their eyes lingered curiosity, envy, and sometimes fear. Fathers spoke of the prophecy in hushed tones, debating whether this child would be a blessing or a burden. The village elders, draped in colorful robes and beaded necklaces, sat under the shade of a large baobab tree. Their faces were etched with years of wisdom and worry. "The child will bear a mark," one elder said, voice trembling slightly, "a sign that the heavens have chosen them for a great purpose. But it is not without trial. There will be sorrow before there is joy." Children played nearby, unaware of the weight of prophecy, while the adults' whispers grew louder. Some feared the unknown, believing that any unusual mark or event could bring misfortune. Others felt a spark of hope, dreaming of a child who could heal, guide, or lead them toward a brighter future. Amina and Kofi exchanged a glance, a silent agreement passing between them. They would protect their child. They would love it fiercely no matter what the prophecy foretold. And yet, a cold dread lingered. What if the villagers were right? What if the child was born different, marked in a way that would ignite fear instead of hope? As the sun climbed higher, a soft breeze whispered through the village, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. The air felt alive, charged with expectation. The couple returned home, their steps heavy with anticipation, unaware that soon the life within Amina would bring the entire village to a standstill, forever. The night was silent, save for the distant croak of frogs and the occasional rustle of leaves. Inside the small hut, Amina groaned with every contraction, sweat beading her forehead. Kofi's hands were steady on hers, but his knuckles whitened with each wave of pain that shook her. The midwife, an older woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, moved quickly, her hands skilled but gentle. "Breathe, Amina. Focus on your child. Focus on the life you are bringing forth." Hours passed like an eternity. Amina's cries echoed through the hut, mingling with the low chants of Kofi, who whispered prayers under his breath. The air was thick with tension, hope, and fear. Finally, with one last, shuddering effort, a cry pierced the night. Amina collapsed back onto the mat, exhausted, and the midwife lifted the newborn into the candlelight. Kofi leaned in, his eyes wide with both relief and curiosity. And then the midwife froze. A scar stretched across the baby's small chest, faint but unmistakable, glowing under the flickering candlelight. It was as if the mark had been carved by destiny itself. The villagers who had gathered outside the hut after hearing whispers of labor, felt a ripple of shock and awe. Some gasped, clutching their children to their chests. Others whispered prayers and curses under their breath. Amina trembled as she reached for her child. It is not," her voice broke. "It is not what we expected." Kofi's hands shook as he touched the baby's soft skin, tracing the scar with trembling fingers. Love surged through him, fierce and protective, but a shadow of fear lingered. What did this mean? Was this the sign foretold by the elders? Was this scar a blessing, or a curse. The midwife whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. It is the mark of the prophecy. The child is chosen. But the path will not be easy. The villagers murmured among themselves. Fear mingled with awe. Some believed the child carried great power. Others worried for their own safety, imagining misfortune and trials ahead. Then the prophet arrived. Cloaked in flowing robes, his eyes deep and knowing, he moved slowly toward the hut, the villagers parting respectfully. The moment he saw the baby, tears streamed down his weathered face. He sank to his knees, unable to speak, only holding his hands over his heart. Finally, his voice trembled as he spoke, barely above a whisper. This child carries a burden of destiny. Protect them, guide them, for the path they are born to walk will test the hearts of all who live here. But in this scar lies the seed of hope, even if it begins in sorrow. Amina clutched her child, tears streaming down her cheeks. Kofi wrapped his arms around them both, feeling both pride and fear. The hut was filled with a tense mixture of love, awe, and uncertainty. Outside, the village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the story of this child to unfold. The night stretched on, heavy with the weight of prophecy. And somewhere in the wind, the soft cry of the newborn mingled with the whispers of destiny, carrying with it the promise of change, challenge, and a journey no one could yet imagine. The scar on Amari's chest had grown with him. Though it was no longer bright against his dark skin, it remained unmistakable, a quiet reminder of the prophecy whispered at his birth. At 7 years old, he moved through the village streets with a cautious step, aware of the eyes that followed him, the whispers that followed him. Children would run past, glancing over their shoulders, pointing with fingers that wavered between curiosity and fear. Some called him the marked one, others simply avoided him altogether. Amari learned early that smiles could hide suspicion, and laughter could turn into ridicule. At home, Amina watched him with a mixture of pride and worry. She tried to shelter him from the harsh judgments of neighbors, offering soft words and warm embraces. Your scar is part of who you are, she told him one afternoon, tucking his shirt over the faint mark. It is not shame. It is strength. And one day they will see it too. Kofi stood nearby, silent but watchful. His hands were rough from labor, but they trembled whenever he imagined someone hurting his son. He wanted to protect him, to shield him from the weight of prophecy that had shadowed the family since the day Amari was born. Yet he knew that life in Kora was not so forgiving. The villagers' opinions carried weight, and the village could be both nurturing and cruel. Despite the whispers, Amari had moments of innocence that reminded his parents of the purity of childhood. He would chase butterflies through fields of wildflowers, his laughter rising over the river like a song. He loved the animals around the village, speaking softly to birds and goats as if they understood the pain and hope he carried. But even in these moments, the weight of the scar pressed on him. When he stumbled and scraped his knee, other children would point to his chest, asking in hushed, fearful tones if the mark had cursed him. Amari learned to hide, to retreat into himself, and yet, a stubborn spark of courage lived inside him, refusing to be snuffed out. One afternoon, as he wandered near the river, he noticed a younger child struggling to cross the slippery stones. Without hesitation, Amari extended his small hand and guided the trembling child to safety. The villagers who had been watching from a distance gasped. Here was the marked one, feared by some, ignored by others, but he had just saved a life. Whispers of awe began to ripple through the village, a subtle shift in perception. At school, or whatever the children called their lessons under the baobab trees, Amari's scar often drew attention. Teachers were careful with him, both impressed and wary, unsure how to guide a child who seemed destined for more than simple learning. Yet he excelled, showing insight beyond his years. He would answer questions with surprising clarity, noticing patterns others overlooked, offering gentle advice to those who teased or doubted him. Amina noticed these small victories and felt her heart swell with a mixture of relief and hope. See, Kofi? There is goodness in him. There is strength, she whispered one evening as they sat outside the hut, watching Amari play with his few trusted friends. Kofi nodded, though worry lingered in his eyes. Strength, yes, but the prophecy's shadow had not yet lifted. Not all villagers were convinced. Some murmured that Amari's abilities were unnatural, signs of something dangerous or otherworldly. Others feared that his scar marked him for a purpose that might bring misfortune to the village. They watched him from afar, their skepticism a constant weight on the boy's shoulders. Still, Amari showed resilience that surprised everyone. He would walk through the village carrying water for the elderly, help mend broken roofs and care for the animals. Each act of courage, each quiet moment of kindness, chipped away at the fear surrounding him. Slowly, whispers of suspicion turned to curiosity, then to cautious respect. Even the children who had once mocked him began to seek his help or follow his lead in small games. Yet with every step forward, Amari wrestled with an internal struggle. Nights were the hardest. Alone under the thin blanket of his bed, he traced the scar with his small fingers and wondered what it meant. Was he meant to bring hope, as the prophet had said? Or was he destined to bring sorrow, as some villagers feared? He would close his eyes, praying silently, longing to understand the path he had been chosen to walk. One evening the prophet visited their home. Though Amari had grown accustomed to the man's presence, the boy's heart quickened. The prophet knelt by the fire, studying the boy with eyes that seemed to pierce through the surface of the world. "The child grows," the prophet said softly, voice layered with emotion. "They carry what few could endure. The scar is a mark of destiny, not of misfortune. But the path will test not only them but those who love them most. You parents must be steadfast. Your faith, your courage, your protection. These are the shields that will guide this child." Amina clutched Kofi's arm, both relieved and anxious. The prophet's words were a balm, yet they were also a warning. Life would not be easy for Amari. The boy's gifts, his compassion, his courage, all were intertwined with trials that had yet to unfold. As the sun set over Nkora, painting the village in hues of orange and purple, Amari sat at the edge of the river, tossing small stones into the water. Each ripple seemed to echo the uncertainty he felt inside, yet also the quiet strength growing within him. In his eyes, there was a spark of defiance against fear and doubt. In his heart, the courage of a child who would one day face destiny with unwavering resolve. The villagers watched from a distance, some with suspicion, others with hope. All were learning slowly that this child, marked, tested, and extraordinary, would challenge everything they thought they knew about fear, love, and destiny. And so, under the shadow of the baobab trees, amidst whispers of prophecy and cautious admiration, Amari grew. Each day brought trials, small victories, and quiet revelations. Each day shaped him into someone the village could neither fully understand nor ignore, a child who would one day stand at the center of fate itself. The calm of the village of Nkora had begun to waver. Strange events whispered through the winds and rustled the leaves of the baobab trees. Birds flew in unusual patterns, sometimes circling above the village square in a tight, unnatural spiral. At night, a low, almost mournful hum drifted across the fields, and the river seemed to murmur in voices only some could hear. For many villagers these were simply signs of nature's whims, but for others they were omens tied to the child with the scar, Amari. Amari, now 10, felt the weight of his uniqueness more heavily than ever. He had grown quieter, more introspective, carrying the mark on his chest like a secret burden. Children who once whispered or avoided him now looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear. Some followed him in silence, reluctant to speak, while others tested his patience, attempting to provoke him into anger. Yet Amari had learned early that control was his strength. Each act of restraint, each careful word, was a way of shaping the destiny that had been whispered into the village long before his birth. The tension in the village escalated as the shadows of fear grew longer. Mysterious accidents began to occur. Crops wilting overnight, livestock falling ill without cause, and small fires breaking out in the huts near the river. The villagers muttered about curses, believing the events were linked to the prophecy and to Amari himself. Fear gnawed at them, twisting neighborly trust into suspicion. Some mothers pulled their children close when he passed, whispering hurried prayers. Fathers scowled at the boy, uncertain whether to admire his courage or suspect him of bringing ill fortune. Among the villagers, one man, Jallo, grew particularly hostile. A respected farmer and local figure, Jallo had once been friendly to Kofi's family. But envy had taken root. He resented the attention Amari received, the way the villagers whispered of the child's insight, of his courage, of the small miracles he seemed to inspire. Jallo began to speak against the boy openly, warning neighbors that the prophecy could be dangerous, that a child marked so visibly might bring calamity. Amari was not unaware of Jallo's hostility. One afternoon, as he helped repair a broken fence along the edge of the village, Jallo appeared, his shadow long in the setting sun. "Boy," he said sharply, "you walk among us as if you are more than the rest. Beware. Some marks are not blessings, they are warnings." Amari's heart thudded in his chest. He wanted to respond, to defend himself, but something inside him, a quiet, growing strength, urged him to remain calm. Words could inflame fear, action could define truth. He nodded, letting the silence speak for him, while Jallo's scowl deepened before he turned and left. Yet even as external conflict stirred, Amari faced an inner struggle that was far more consuming. He wondered if the scar marked him as different for a reason beyond anyone's understanding. Was it a gift or a burden? Could he ever be accepted truly by a village that oscillated between admiration and suspicion? Each night, when the world was still, he traced the faint line across his chest, feeling the pulse of destiny beneath it. Strange dreams began to haunt him. In them, shadows moved in shapes that spoke in riddles. Rivers flowed backward, and the wind carried voices of people long gone. Often, the prophet appeared in these visions, his eyes wide with sorrow and purpose. "The path will demand courage," he whispered, though his voice echoed in ways that made Amari's skin prickle. "You will be tested, and not all will stand beside you. Only those who believe in the heart will endure." The village, meanwhile, felt the creeping tension in tangible ways. Mothers whispered warnings, elders huddled near the shrine, and some even consulted charms and amulets to protect themselves from unseen misfortune. Amari noticed the glances, the hesitant steps, the sudden stillness when he approached. Fear was no longer just a whisper, it had become a current that tugged at the edges of daily life. And yet, the mystical incidents persisted. One morning, Amari noticed that a small patch of withered crops near Jallo's hut had mysteriously revived overnight, leaves gleaming with dew that sparkled even in the dim light of dawn. A stray goat that had wandered into a thorn bush returned unscathed, bleating softly as if in gratitude. Though he didn't understand the full meaning of these events, Amari sensed that his actions, guided by instinct or something deeper, carried a power the villagers could neither ignore nor comprehend. The growing tension came to a head one afternoon during the village gathering near the river. Jallo stood at the edge of the crowd, his voice loud and harsh. "This child, this marked one, cannot be trusted," he bellowed. "Every misfortune we have faced is tied to him. We must be cautious. We cannot let prophecy blind us to reality." A hush fell over the crowd. Some villagers nodded in fear, others in anger, while a few looked to Amari with hesitant hope. The boy, standing at the riverbank, felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. He could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down, the prophecy demanding him to act in ways he did not yet understand. Amari's gaze drifted to the scar on his chest. In its faint curve he saw more than a mark. He saw resilience. He saw a challenge meant to test not only him but the hearts of those around him. And though he was only 10, a spark of courage ignited within him, a quiet, defiant promise to meet whatever trials lay ahead. That night, under the flickering light of the small fire outside their hut, Amari confided in his mother. "Will they ever accept me, Mama? Or will they always see the scar first?" Amina pulled him close, wrapping him in a shawl as if shielding him from the world. "They will see it eventually," she whispered. "But first you must be strong, Amari. Strong in heart, strong in mind. The world may fear what it does not understand, but you will teach them courage, patience, and kindness. One day even Jallo will see the truth of who you are." Kofi placed a hand on Amari's shoulder, his voice steady despite the tension in his eyes. "The path will not be easy. There will be obstacles, anger, and doubt. But we stand with you. Always. No one can take that from us, not even fear itself." As the fire crackled and shadows danced on the hut walls, Amari felt both the burden and the strength of his destiny. Outside, the wind whispered through the village, carrying an eerie mix of warning and hope. The dark omens were not idle. They were signs, nudging the boy toward the trials he was destined to face. And somewhere in the distance, the river murmured in voices that only he could hear, promising both challenge and reward, sorrow and triumph. Amari's journey was only beginning, and the shadows gathering around him were not just threats, but lessons waiting to be learned. The sun rose over Nkora with a heavy, golden light that did little to lift the tension in the village. The wind carried a dry scent, warning of a coming storm, though no clouds darkened the sky. For weeks, the river had run low, the crops had wilted, and even the goats and chickens seemed restless. The villagers whispered anxiously, their eyes repeatedly drifting to Amari's home, to the boy with the scar who had grown into a quiet, watchful presence among them. Amari, now 12, had become taller, leaner, and more composed, yet the weight of the prophecy pressed down on him more than ever. Nights were no longer restful. Dreams of fire, shadowed forests, and rivers turning to blood haunted him. In his visions, the prophet appeared, more urgent and solemn than ever before. "The time has come," he would whisper, "to step into the path you were born to walk. Strength alone will not be enough. You must trust in your heart. The boy could no longer ignore the signs around him. One morning, the village awoke to find the river had receded even further, leaving fish stranded on the cracked banks. The elders gathered under the baobab tree, their faces pale and lined with worry. "This is no ordinary drought," one said, his voice trembling. "It is a trial sent for the one marked by the heavens. He must act, or all will suffer." Kofi and Amina watched from their hut, their hands intertwined as they exchanged worried glances. "He is ready," Kofi whispered, though his voice was tight with fear. "I feel it. But is the village ready to accept him?" Amina nodded slowly, brushing a hand over her son's head. "He has been ready in his heart all along. But the path will demand everything of him, and of us." That day the prophet arrived in the village square, his robes catching the sunlight, eyes heavy with concern. He approached Amari, whose scar was no longer just a mark, it was a symbol, a quiet emblem of his destiny. "The time has come," the prophet said, voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "You were born for this trial, Amari. The village looks to you, though many do not yet understand. Your courage will guide them, or their fear will destroy them." A ripple of unease passed through the villagers. Some whispered warnings, others silently prayed for the boy to succeed. Jallo, standing at the edge of the crowd, scowled, muttering curses under his breath. The envious farmer's eyes flicked between Amari and the river, as though daring the boy to fail. The trial revealed itself swiftly. That afternoon, as Amari approached the river to examine the low waters, a sudden violent storm erupted upstream. Muddy torrents rushed down, carrying debris and threatening to flood the village. Women screamed, children cried, and elders scrambled to secure homes. In the chaos, the villagers' fear and doubt overwhelmed them. Panic spread like wildfire. Amari froze for a moment, heart pounding, then felt a calm settle over him, a presence that seemed to whisper through his veins. He remembered the prophet's words, strength alone would not be enough. Trust your heart. Stepping into the torrent, he guided the frightened villagers, shouting instructions with surprising authority. He helped carry children, supported elders across slippery rocks, and directed villagers to reinforce weak huts. His hands moved quickly, his mind calculating each risk, each path to safety. All the while, the scar on his chest pulsed faintly beneath his shirt, a reminder of the destiny that had chosen him. Even Jallo could not ignore what was happening. The farmer's lips parted in disbelief as he watched the boy, the marked one, leading the village through chaos with a courage that defied his age. Fear and admiration warred in Jallo's eyes, though pride did not yet take root. As the waters began to recede, another test emerged. A small child had wandered too close to the edge, clinging to a thin branch as the current swirled below. Without hesitation, Amari leapt, grabbing the child and pulling them to safety. The crowd held its breath, then erupted in relief and awe. Mothers wept, clutching their children tightly, and elders muttered prayers of thanks. Later, as the village gathered near the central shrine, the prophet spoke again, placing a heavy hand on Amari's shoulder. "Do you understand now?" he asked gently, eyes glistening. "This scar, this mark you carry is not a curse. It is a sign of protection, of legacy. You were born to guide, to stand when others cannot, to inspire courage when fear threatens to consume." Amari nodded, the words filling him with a mixture of pride and humility. Yet he also felt the gravity of what lay ahead. The prophecy was not simply about survival, it was about shaping hearts, teaching others to rise above fear, and embracing trials that would test the spirit. That evening, the village elders convened under the baobab tree once more. Faces etched with awe and respect, they acknowledged Amari's courage and wisdom. "The child with the scar has saved us," one elder said, voice wavering. "He has proven that destiny is not always a shadow of doom, it can be a light we follow." Even Jallo begrudgingly approached Amari and lowered his eyes. I was wrong," he murmured. "Perhaps the mark is not a curse after all." Though his pride still lingered, the acknowledgement was a small but important victory. The night brought quiet reflection. Amari sat beside his parents outside their hut, listening to the distant croak of frogs and the gentle rustle of leaves. "It was hard," he admitted softly. "I was scared, but somehow I knew I had to do it." Amina brushed his hair back and held him close. "You have shown us what courage truly is, my son. Not just strength in body but strength in heart. You carried the village on your shoulders and reminded us all that fear is only powerful if we let it be." Kofi placed a firm hand on Amari's shoulder. "Remember this night, Amari. Remember that even in darkness your heart will guide you. You are the child of prophecy, yes, but you are also your own person. The choices you make will define you far more than the mark you carry. In the days that followed, the villagers' perception shifted even more. Fear gave way to respect. Curiosity became admiration. The children who had once whispered and pointed now followed Amari eagerly, eager to learn from the boy who had faced the storm and led them all to safety. But Amari knew the trials were far from over. The scar on his chest, once a mark of uncertainty, was now a symbol of the journey ahead, a journey that would demand courage, compassion, and wisdom beyond his years. The prophet had made it clear. Destiny was not a path of ease, and the boy's heart would be tested again and again. Yet for the first time, Amari felt a quiet confidence. He had faced the first true trial of his life and emerged not only alive but stronger, more certain of his purpose. The villagers had seen his courage, and the world had begun to acknowledge the child they had once feared. The night sky stretched above Ankora, clear and full of stars, as if bearing witness to the boy's triumph. Amari lay awake, fingers brushing the scar, feeling the pulse of destiny. Somewhere deep within he understood the truth. The mark he carried was never meant to isolate him, but to connect him, to guide him, protect him, and remind all who doubted that even in darkness, courage and hope could shine brighter than fear. The storm had passed, but the path ahead was still uncertain. Trials would come, forces both seen and unseen would challenge him, and the weight of prophecy would never fully lift. Yet Amari, child of destiny, knew he would meet each challenge head-on, guided by heart, courage, and the quiet, enduring strength that had always been his. The village of Ankora had changed. The once quiet whispers of fear and suspicion had begun to shift, but the scars of doubt still lingered. People went about their days cautiously, watching the sky, the river, and the boy who carried the mark of prophecy. Amari, now 14, had grown into a young man whose presence commanded both respect and curiosity. The scar on his chest, once a symbol of uncertainty, now glimmered faintly in the sun, a quiet emblem of the courage and destiny he had embraced. Yet even as the village began to heal from past trials, a deeper crisis emerged. Crops that had survived the previous floods now showed signs of disease, wilting in strange patterns despite the villagers' best efforts. Animals grew restless, and a mysterious illness began to spread, causing fear to tighten its grip once more. The elders convened beneath the baobab tree, their faces etched with worry. "This is no ordinary misfortune," one said. "It is a test, another trial for the child marked by destiny. He must lead us once more or all may be lost." Amari stood quietly listening. He felt the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders, heavier even than during the flood. He knew the scar he carried was more than a mark, it was a call to action. The first trials had been preparation. This was the true test of his courage, wisdom, and compassion. Early the next morning he moved among the villagers, examining the sick animals and the dying crops. He noticed patterns that others overlooked. Certain plants seemed to wilt near shaded areas, while others withered near stagnant water. He guided the villagers in separating healthy crops from the infected, watering selectively, and creating channels to divert stagnant water away from their fields. Some villagers still hesitated, unsure if a boy, even one marked by prophecy, could succeed. Jallo, who had once openly opposed him, now watched from a distance, his pride clashing with the undeniable truth of Amari's growing influence. The boy's calm confidence, paired with his strategic thinking, inspired trust, even among those who had doubted him before. But the challenges did not end there. A sudden fire broke out at the edge of the village, sparked by the dry winds and the heat of the sun. Panic spread as villagers rushed to save their homes and possessions. Amari did not hesitate. With quick thinking and clear instructions, he organized the villagers into teams, creating water lines and controlling the fire before it could spread further. His courage under pressure and his ability to guide others without panic turned what could have been disaster into triumph. That evening, the village gathered once more by the central shrine. The prophet appeared, his face illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. He approached Amari and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, eyes glistening with pride. "You have done more than survive the trials," he said softly. "You have redeemed the fears of this village. You have transformed doubt into hope and fear into courage. This scar, once feared, is now a symbol of protection, strength, and divine blessing. The path of destiny is never easy, but you have proven worthy of its calling." Amina and Kofi stood nearby, tears streaming down their faces. They had watched their son grow from a boy burdened by fear into a young man who embodied the very courage the prophecy had promised. "Our child," Amina whispered, voice trembling. "He has done what we never could have imagined." Kofi, his eyes still fixed on Amari, nodded slowly. The prophecy is fulfilled, not in magic, not in fear, but in the heart. In the choices he made, the lives he saved, and the hope he inspired. He is our pride, our strength, and the village's guiding light. The villagers began to speak openly of Amari's deeds. Mothers shared stories of how he had saved their children from floods and illness. Fathers admitted, sometimes reluctantly, that the boy's courage and wisdom had surpassed their own. Even Jallo, his chest heavy with the weight of humility, approached Amari and extended a hand. "I see now," he said, voice rough with emotion, "that the mark you carry is not a curse. It is a blessing we failed to understand. Forgive me for doubting you." Amari smiled gently, placing a hand on Jallo's shoulder. "There is nothing to forgive," he said softly. "We all learn in time. Fear often clouds judgment. But we can choose courage instead." As the sun set, the village gathered around the fire, sharing food, laughter, and stories. The fear that had once gripped their hearts had been replaced by hope, admiration, and respect. The scar on Amari's chest, once a source of whispered fear, had become a symbol of resilience, strength, and guidance. Children no longer hid or mocked him. They ran to his side, eager to follow, to learn, and to be inspired by his courage. The prophet remained nearby, observing quietly. At last he spoke again, his voice carrying across the night. "The trials are not yet over," he said, "but the heart that endures and leads with compassion will always find strength. Amari has embraced his destiny, and through him the village has been transformed. Remember this night, for it will be told for generations, a night when fear was conquered by courage and prophecy fulfilled through love and choice." Amari, sitting beside his parents, felt a profound peace settle over him. He traced the scar on his chest with his fingers, feeling the pulse of destiny beneath it. It was no longer a mark of uncertainty. It was a reminder of the journey, the trials, and the triumphs. It was a symbol of hope, not just for him but for every person in Korra. The villagers began to celebrate, singing songs of courage and unity, their voices rising into the night sky. Lanterns swayed gently in the warm breeze, illuminating faces filled with admiration and gratitude. For the first time the village felt truly whole. The fear and doubt that had once divided them were replaced by connection, understanding, and collective strength. That night, as Amari lay beneath the stars, he understood that redemption was not simply survival. It was the ability to inspire, to heal, and to transform those around him. His actions had turned fear into hope, and despair into courage. The scar that had once isolated him now connected him to the hearts of everyone in the village. Amina held him close, whispering, "You have shown us what it means to be brave, my son. Not just in strength but in heart." Kofi added, voice steady but full of emotion, "You have transformed more than the village, you have transformed all of us. The mark you carry is no longer a burden but a blessing." Even the river seemed to acknowledge the transformation, flowing calmly under the moonlight, its gentle currents carrying the reflection of a village reborn. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time, the signs of prophecy felt like guidance rather than warning. The prophet, seeing the village restored and the child of destiny fulfilled, smiled softly. "The mark is not the child," he murmured. "It is what the child inspires in others. Destiny is not a path of ease, but a path of transformation, and this boy has illuminated it for all." As the stars shone above Nkora, the village slept peacefully for the first time in years. Amari lay with his parents, their hands entwined, hearts full of relief, pride, and love. He had faced trials, embraced destiny, and in doing so, had brought redemption and transformation to everyone he loved. The scar on his chest, once feared and misunderstood, now gleamed softly in the moonlight, a permanent testament to courage, hope, and the power of a heart willing to stand for what is right. In the days that followed, Nkora began to flourish. Crops grew strong, the animals recovered, and the villagers worked together in ways they never had before. The lessons of courage, compassion, and leadership that Amari had embodied spread quietly through the village, shaping a new generation. Children played without fear of ridicule, and neighbors helped one another with renewed purpose. The mark on Amari's chest became a symbol of unity, a reminder that even the heaviest burdens could be transformed into blessings through strength of heart. Years had passed since the trials that had shaped both Amari and the village of Nkora. The boy with the scar had grown into a young man whose presence was both gentle and commanding. Though the mark on his chest remained, it was no longer a symbol of fear, nor even merely of destiny. It had become a symbol of resilience, hope, and the power of courage to transform lives. The village itself had changed, reborn from the trials it had endured. Fields thrived under careful hands, guided by the lessons Amari had taught. Children ran freely, learning not just to survive, but to act with compassion and courage. The elders spoke openly of prophecy, not with dread, but with respect for the ways a single heart could shape an entire community. Amari's parents, Amina and Kofi, watched quietly as the village bustled around them, their hearts full. They remembered the long nights of worry, the fearful whispers of neighbors, and the shadow of doubt that had lingered over their son. Now, seeing him stand tall, confident, and at peace with himself, they felt a joy that words could hardly capture. "Our son," Amina whispered, brushing her fingers across the scar that had once caused her so much anxiety. "He has done more than we ever dreamed. He has changed not only the village but all of us. He has taught us what it means to have courage, to forgive, and to believe in what is unseen." Kofi nodded, voice husky with emotion. "Yes. And he has reminded us that destiny is not simply a burden to bear, but a gift to embrace. The boy we feared might bring misfortune has instead brought hope, strength, and unity." Amari, standing nearby, smiled softly at his parents. He had come to understand that the journey of his life was not just about trials or prophecies. It was about love, compassion, and the choices that shape a person's legacy. The scar on his chest was no longer a source of anxiety or isolation. It was a reminder of everything he had endured, everything he had learned, and everything he had given to the people who had once doubted him. The villagers themselves had begun to change in ways subtle and profound. Jallo, once a man of jealousy and fear, now worked alongside Amari in the fields, quietly acknowledging the boy's wisdom and leadership. Others who had whispered about curses and misfortune now told stories of courage, of the child who had faced storms, disease, and fear with unwavering heart. Even the youngest children knew the tale, learning that courage and compassion could overcome even the most daunting challenges. They no longer mocked differences or feared the unknown. They followed the example of the boy with the scar, understanding that strength of heart mattered more than appearances or superstition. Amari also reflected on the spiritual lessons of his journey. He remembered the prophet's words, spoken with a mixture of sorrow and pride. "The mark is not a curse but a path. The trials will test you, yes, but your heart will guide you through." The truth of this message had become clear. The scar had never defined him. His courage, wisdom, and compassion had. And in embracing these qualities, he had fulfilled the prophecy not by fear but by love. One evening, as the sun set over Nkora, Amari walked to the edge of the village, where the river sparkled under the fading light. He watched the water, remembering the floods and trials of his childhood. The river, once a source of fear and uncertainty, now reflected calm and promise. He ran his fingers along the scar on his chest, feeling its warmth, and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the journey, the lessons, and the people who had shaped him. Parents brought their children to see him, not as a figure to be feared, but as a guide and mentor. Amari spoke softly, offering advice, encouragement, and comfort, always reminding them that courage came from the heart, and that every person could rise above fear to do what was right. The village's future seemed brighter than it ever had, nourished not only by crops and clean water, but by hope, trust, and unity. Amina and Kofi watched their son, hearts swelling with pride and relief. The journey that had begun with fear and uncertainty had ended in transformation, for Amari, for themselves, and for the entire village. The parents reflected on the lessons they had learned, that love and faith could protect and guide, that courage could inspire change, and that destiny was not a fixed path but a series of choices, each carrying its own power. The prophet visited once more, now older and quieter, eyes full of quiet satisfaction. He approached Amari and placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, the scar shining faintly in the sunset's light. "You have done what few could," he said. "You have fulfilled the prophecy not through fear, not through power, but through heart. This village, this people will remember your deeds for generations. You have turned trials into triumph, doubt into belief, and fear into hope. The mark you carry is eternal, not as a scar, but as a symbol of the courage within all who follow it." Amari bowed his head, humility and pride mixing in his chest. "I only did what was needed," he said softly. "I only followed the heart I was given." The prophet smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "And that is enough. Always enough." Years turned to decades and Nkora flourished. Stories of the boy with the scar became legend, told and retold around fires, under the baobab trees, and by parents to their children. The scar, once a source of fear and uncertainty, became a symbol of strength, resilience, and divine purpose. Children grew up learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Amari, now grown and wise, walked among the villagers with a quiet presence. He helped resolve disputes, guided young leaders, and continued to teach that compassion, courage, and faith could transform lives. He had learned that the true mark of destiny was not in the scars we carry, but in the love, guidance, and hope we leave behind. One evening, sitting with Amina and Kofi beneath the stars, Amari reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The scar, it was never a burden, he said softly. It was a reminder of everything I've endured, everything I've learned, and everything I can give. I hope that the children of this village and the generations after them understand that too. Amina smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. They will, my son, because you have shown them, because you have lived it. The village will carry your story in their hearts always.